Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, here we are. It's a beautiful day, a little bit of sun. 4 below zero, last I checked. My name's Ted O'Toole, and today I'm going to talk about Chapter 7 from the Vimalakirti Sutra. Hi, everyone online. Good to see you all. Everyone in the room. The text I'm working from, it's called The Holy Teaching of Vimalakirti, translated by Robert Thurman. So I recently reread this. I read this years ago, and I think it was maybe a fairly superficial reading. I was pretty new to Buddhism then. But I've reread it with a student to whom I am grateful. We get together every couple of weeks and we read a little bit. We trade off paragraphs, reading out loud, and then we discuss it as we go along. And that's a pretty good way to read a book. When you do that, you feel like you've really read the book. So, that's something that folks could do if you're interested in studying a text. Find a partner or two, get together and read it in that intense way. It took us a little over 2 years, but we got it done. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's beautifully written. It is unflinching in its application of the Dharma, and it's funny. A lot of times it's really funny, and sometimes just weird. And I know it's a favorite of Tim's, and he's taught this book quite a lot. So I thought I would pick a chapter. So I picked a chapter, one of my favorites, called The Goddess. And so I'll start with a little background on the Vimalakirti Sutra. That's how I'm pronouncing it, Vimalakirti. I've heard it many different ways. I looked it up online, and you can hear the pronunciations, and those were totally inconsistent too. So I'm going with Vimalakirti. I cannot tell you whether that's how it was originally pronounced. But Vimalakirti is said to be an actual historical figure. He was a wealthy patron of the Buddha, but that's all we know about him. And this sutra was written the 2nd century of the Common Era. So we have no idea who wrote it. The original Sanskrit was thought to be lost for a long time. We had it only in 7 translations into the Chinese, but the original Sanskrit was found in the Potala in Tibet in 2001. And one reason this is really beloved is because Vimalakirti is a layperson. And it's clear from the book that he is the best of them all, except the Buddha. He bests everyone. The Buddha's immediate disciples, Bodhisattvas, everyone. And that's really good because, it kind of democratizes things. There was this idea at one time that you had to be a monk in order to become awakened. And of course, that's not true. You don't have to be a monk. You don't have to be a priest to have deep spiritual understanding. So, and part of Mahayana Buddhism, of which this is a part, is that awakening is available to everyone, absolutely everyone. So this is kind of an antidote to that sort of exclusive view of who can become awake. So the story is that Vimalakirti sort of pretends to be sick. He's not really sick, at least not physically sick. It's a kind of skillful means. He does this to set up what's going to happen next. And so the Buddha hears about this, and he asks all of his leading disciples, like Mahakashapa and Subhuti and others, to go visit Vimalakirti and see how he's doing. And one by one, they tell the Buddha all of the reasons they are afraid to go see Vimalakirti. Because at one point I said this, and he came back with this, and he totally pointed out the error of my ways. He pointed out my attachments. And so no one will go until finally Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, agrees to go see Vimalakirti. And so he goes to his sick room, which I believe is 10 feet by 10 feet, and he brings a retinue with him of course, tens of thousands of beings. And Vimalakirti transforms his humble abode into a vast cosmic palace. So there's room for everybody. So do we take this literally? Is this a miracle? Are we supposed to believe this really happened? I think probably not. I think it's a story. It's a creative way of helping us to open up to the inconceivable. So Vimalakirti talks to this assembled multitude. He explains that his sickness is the sickness of all living beings. My sickness comes from ignorance and the thirst for existence. And he talks about how to deal with that sickness, which is basically embracing non-duality. So we get eventually to chapter 7. Thereupon Manjushri, the crown prince, addressed the Lichavi Vimalakirti. Good sir, how should a bodhisattva regard all living beings? So a bodhisattva is a deeply realized being who wants to help all beings. And this is a pretty good question. If one is a bodhisattva, how does one think of all of these beings who one would like to help? And if we come from a conventional point of view, we might think something like this. Well, you love beings, you understand their suffering, you pity them, you do all you can to help them. But that's not the answer he gets. The answer he gets is, Manjushri, a bodhisattva should regard all living beings as a wise man regards the reflection of the moon in water. So a wise man, we could say a wise person, should regard all living beings like the reflection of the moon in water. So the moon in water appears a lot in Zen, and I think it has to do with the insubstantiality of things and the interrelatedness of things, the dual nature of things, which is really not dual. My take on it right now might be a little different from what you've heard before. But if we look at the actual moon, it appears very real and very solid. So real and solid that we might think that it is eternal and definable, and above all, something that exists in itself, something separate from other things. And it's so solid looking that we say, well, of course it's a thing. The moon is the moon, period. But if we see that way, we miss part of the truth. For instance, the truth of how our own perceptions are involved. Our idea of what the moon is comes from a pretty limited perspective. We've never been there. We see it and we go, oh, it's round. Oh, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a crescent. We say it waxes and wanes, but that's really more about our perspective standing here on Earth than it is about what the moon actually does. So if we look at it deeply, we can see that our perceptions cloud the issue. The moon is not eternal. It could not exist without the earth or sun, and it is not separate from them. It's part of a system, and the system is every bit as real of a thing as the individual moon. But if we look at the reflection of the moon in the water, that's something different. We don't have this idea that it's really the moon. It has to do with the moon. The moon is an element of it. We see the brightness on the surface of the water, but maybe it's a little bit broken up and we see the water shimmering too, or wavering. And we see that there's a blending of things. We see the moonness of the water. We see the waterness of the moon. We maybe see how our own perceptions are involved here. Our perception of the solidity of things and the independence of things is challenged. So we may think moonness is not separable from non-moonness. And so should the Bodhisattva regard all living beings, not as solid individual things existing in isolation from other beings, but as reflections, as creatures dependent upon all other creatures and upon the earth and everything. Ted is inseparable from not Ted. And if we're really to understand him, we have to understand that. If you expect me to have a solid, immovable, definable core and never to deviate that, you'll be mistaken about me. I'm subject to influences. Even if I wanted to define myself as something unchanging, I wouldn't be able to do it. So to really see me, you have to see this entire room, and you have to see beyond this room as well. I'm just kind of defined by things around me. I can work against that and try to say, no, I am the master of my own self-definition, but doesn't always happen. So we have this sort of swirling process we call the universe, and you can take a snapshot, a moment in time of one little piece of it, and you can say, well, that's Ted. But if you do that, you're going to miss some things. And if you look at people that way, you're going to miss things and you may not really be able to help them adequately. So that part about the reflection is just the first sentence of a long paragraph. And he goes on to list in this beautiful prose all of these things that have no substance in themselves, or maybe they're really impossible. And he says that's how we should regard living beings, the way we regard these impossible things. So to be really liberated, we need to perceive it all at once. We need a general awareness of the totality of things, of undifferentiated things, which is not different from differentiated things. So Manjushri, a bodhisattva, should regard all living beings as a wise man regards the reflection of the moon in water, or as magicians regard men created by magic. If someone's created by magic, they're not really real. He should regard them as being like a face in a mirror. Again, we have a reflection, but the face in the mirror, that's saying no self. Regard these selves as having no self. Like the water of a mirage, it's not real. Like the sound of an echo. The sound of an echo is it's like a reflection, only it's sound. Like a mass of clouds in the sky. Like the previous moment of a ball of foam. Like the appearance and disappearance of a bubble of water. Like the core of a plantain tree. I assume plantain trees are hollow. Like a flash of lightning, instantaneous. Like the fifth great element, there are only 4 elements. Like the 7th sense medium, there are only 6 sense mediums. Like the appearance of matter in an immaterial realm. Like a sprout from a rotten seed, can't happen. Like a tortoise-hair coat. This is my favorite. When I was thinking, which chapter do I want to do? I thought, I want to do the one about the tortoise-hair coat. Because I just think that's so funny. Because, tortoises, they're reptiles. They don't have hair. It's just ridiculous that they would have hair. It's ridiculous you can make a coat out of that hair. But really, if you look deeply at the things we name in our naming conventions and how we have to do that arbitrarily all the time, the tortoise-hair coat makes as much sense as any other thing we try to name. It makes as much sense as taking a little piece of this impermanent process and calling it Ted, or calling this temporary edifice here a zendo. So you regard people the way you would regard this impossible coat, not as real people. Or like the fun of games for one who wishes to die. Like the existence of desire, hatred, and folly in a saint. Like thoughts of avarice in a bodhisattva. Like the instincts of passions in a tathagata, a Buddha. A Buddha doesn't have passions. Like the track of a bird in the sky. Like the reincarnation of one who has attained ultimate liberation. And then he says, precisely thus, Manjushri, does a bodhisattva who realizes ultimate selflessness consider all beings. So then Manjushri asked another question. Noble sir, if a bodhisattva considers all living beings in such a way, how does he generate the great love toward them? That's a pretty good question. If people are not real, how do we generate love toward them? And it may be a question that has occurred to you as I'm speaking or prior to that. How could it possibly help to think people aren't real? How is that going to increase our compassion? And I think that's a great question, which is at the heart of our practice, which I've talked about many times. If all beings are empty of a separate self, why care for them? If all is empty, why act in the world? If I'm focusing on the reflection of the moon, how can I love the actual moon? But asking the question that way, and I say this with great love and understanding for all of us deluded humans, comes from a limited place. It comes from a place of ordinary ideas of what love is. It comes from a place maybe of thinking that I have to know someone and care for them and be attached with them and maybe be kind of intertwined with them in order to really love them. My love must be based on their qualities or some kind of mutuality of relationship that we have. And that limited view, taken to kind of an extreme, means I can love my family because I know them, because they exist for me as individuals, but I can't love strangers in the same way. And of course, we all love strangers, and we all have a generalized love for all beings, but I think that there is kind of a human tendency to protect the people we know against the people we don't know. And don't get me wrong, I do have a special love for my family, and I feel a special responsibility to them, and I will look after them first. But I don't want that love to exclude others. I don't want to draw that line. And the really extreme expression of this kind of attitude is something called tribalism. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that term because it could be seen as a criticism of tribal societies. But the idea behind that term is that we love and protect the people we know in our circle, and maybe we demonize everyone else. And that kind of thing happens a lot these days, as we all know. But Vimalakirti, in the answer he's about to give, is going to talk about an entirely different kind of love, which we've all heard of. It's the love of the Bodhisattva, which is beyond attachment and beyond that propensity to think of individuals as being separate from one another. And there's some helpful footnotes in here, which I assume were written by Robert Thurman. And he says that Vimalakirti's answer is the definition of the highest type of compassion, non-perceiving great compassion. Such compassion is pure sensitivity with no cognitive grasp on any person or thing as the identifiable object of its powerful feeling. No cognitive grasp on an individual as the target of this feeling. It's kind of a generalized feeling, which is directed toward all persons, but it's a love so strong that it doesn't depend on any qualities of the thing that's loved. You don't have to know them. So it's an altruistic love. It's a love that asks nothing in return. And that's why we talk about living beings as being unreal, so that we can love them in that way. So if I see you like you're a bubble, or a flash of lightning, or a reflection in the mirror, I'm going to see beyond your individuality. And I can't help but love you in the same way I love my own family, my own grandchildren, and the way I love every tree and every blade of grass. So what is Vimalakirti's answer exactly? Vimalakirti replied, Manjushri, When a bodhisattva considers all living beings in this way, he thinks, just as I have realized the Dharma, so should I teach it to living beings. So how do I love all beings? He doesn't try to explain it in the way I just did. He brings it back to experience. He says, I've realized it, and so I'm going to teach it. How do I do it? I just do it. I just don't need to explain it or have it explained to me. And Thurman says, the Bodhisattva's love is not merely commiseration, but a spontaneous overflow of his great joy and relief in realizing the radiant nature of reality. Although he grasps no living thing, he, being empty of himself, is utterly sensitive to the oppressive gravity of the living being feeling of others. And his love is an outpouring of his awareness of their true nature. So the source of this love is not satisfaction of desire. And we know from the Four Noble Truths that desire and satisfaction of desire is the thing that we're always chasing, and we think it's the road to happiness, and it's actually the road to misery. But joy, this love, comes out of pure joy. So the Bodhisattva generates the love that is truly a refuge for all living beings, the love that is peaceful because free of grasping, the love that is not feverish because free of passions, the love that accords with reality because it is equanimous in all three times, the love that is without conflict because free of the violence of the passions, the love that is non-dual because it is involved neither with the external nor the internal, the love that is imperturbable because totally intimate. And then he goes on to name some of the qualities of this kind of love. Because it is not personal and based in attachment, it can be so skillful, it can be firm. Its high resolve is unbreakable. It is love that is pure, love that is even, love that has eliminated its enemy. The original meaning of arhat from the Theravada is killer of enemies. And there's this early idea in Buddhism that you have to sort of, kill the enemy, destroy the passions. But under the Mahayana view, we can love the enemy, love even our passions, and more on that later. The Buddha's love causes living beings to awaken from their sleep. It is spontaneous. It is a unity of experience. It is a love that is without formality, etc., etc. So then there's a dialogue between Manjushri and Vimalakirti, in which Vimalakirti says that the equanimity of the Bodhisattva is the rendering of blessings without expectation of return. That's pretty good. And then this chapter takes a turn. Remember, this chapter is called The Goddess. Suddenly, this goddess appears. We don't know much about her, but she just jumps right in. Thereupon, a certain goddess who lived in that house, having heard this teaching of the Dharma of the great heroic bodhisattvas, and being delighted, pleased, and overjoyed, manifested herself in a material body and showered the great spiritual heroes, the bodhisattvas, and the great disciples with heavenly flowers. So when I read this chapter the first time, I thought it's kind of like you go to a movie and all of a sudden you feel like you're in a different movie. And at first I thought maybe it's just kind of an odd editing choice that kind of, two parts got stuck together in one chapter. But then I realized that no, I think these really work together because the story about the goddess, which I'll tell you about, is coming up to help us avoid a certain kind of mistake. In Zen, you may know, whenever we set up an opposition, we have to knock down that opposition too. And so it's helpful for me to talk about the moon being different from its reflection. And it's helpful for me to talk about how attached love and non-attached love are different from each other. But I don't want to set up these dualities in such a way that they cannot be reconciled. And how can they be reconciled? It's hard to explain this, and it's really hard to use words for this. And words can only point to something that we feel experientially. But the moon and the reflection are the same. Attached love and non-attached love are the same. And somehow in our delusion, we are perfect. So the goddess appears and showers all of these tens of thousands of beings in the room with flowers. And the flowers fall off of the bodies of the bodhisattvas because the bodhisattvas are beyond attachment. The flowers, which kind of represent the sensual things of this world, they don't stick to the bodhisattvas. But they fall on the bodies of the great disciples like Shariputra, Mahakashapa, and they stick to them. And the great disciples are looking at the bodhisattvas, they want to be like them, so they start trying to pull the flowers off and get rid of them. And the goddess picks out Shariputra and asks him why he's trying to shake the flowers off. And poor Shariputra is once again the fall guy. He's kind of the fall guy in the Heart Sutra. Poor hapless Shariputra. And he says, well, they aren't appropriate. The flowers are not appropriate. And he's probably thinking about how, monks don't wear flowers or pretty things. And the goddess explains that the bodhisattvas have abandoned all of their instincts for passions, and that's why the flowers don't stick to them. So if you're Shariputra and not fully awake, the sensual things of this world will stick to you, and you'll be carried away by them. They will dominate you. It's like not being able to put down your phone. In a modern version of this sutra, cell phones would drop from the sky. and they'd stick to us. We'd be going like this. And we couldn't get rid of them. But if you're a bodhisattva, the cell phone drops from the sky, and you maybe look at the cell phone, you maybe check Facebook, and you let it go. Because it doesn't have that pull on you. You experience the sensual things of this world, and you let them go. You're not attached to them. Or as Thurman puts it, the bodhisattvas do not fear the surface manifestations of passions inevitable in worldly life, because these cannot affect them deeply. And this is a way to get beyond dualism about the passions of this world. There is a place for them in the awakened mind. And there should be, because in fact, no one can escape them. So we'd better find a way to work them in. We're not about killing the passions. We're about not attaching to them. But this is a very important point, lest we think that this is some kind of an excuse for bad behavior on the part of awakened beings. It's not, because all awakened beings are subject to the precepts. So that excuse is not available. But then there follows another long dialogue between the goddess and Shariputra, in which she says that liberation is freedom from desire, hatred, and folly, or she says rather, there is this view that liberation is freedom from desire, and that is the teaching for the excessively proud. If you think you can really leave all human failings behind, you have a pretty high opinion of yourself. You're proud. If you think your teachers can leave all failings behind, you have a pretty high opinion of your teachers, and you're expecting the impossible. And she continues, but those free of pride are taught that the very nature of desire, hatred, and folly is itself liberation. So our failings are part of our awakening. And this is the liberated view beyond all distinctions. I am Buddha as I am, perfectly imperfect Buddha. And this is a paradox. implying two seemingly opposite things about the world. I need to accept myself as I am, and I need to work on myself. From a place of love without attachment, it is possible to see these two things at once, both of these things simultaneously. And it's kind of like parental love. You love your child no matter what, right? No matter how much they misbehave. They could probably never do something that would cause you to stop loving them. But you still discipline them. You still try to make them into a better person. So we can cultivate this. We can do our very best to recognize our failings and work on them, but not let that turn into some kind of self-hatred or extreme self-criticism. So how about a little forgiveness? How about a little lightness? Let's accept that we're imperfect. Let's not be so arrogant as to think that the standard for us individually should be perfection. How about just letting everything that is here be okay? And letting everything that is in here be okay? How about just letting it be okay for a while? So, kind of one more thing about this. The goddess is female, Shariputra is male. So there's an opportunity here to talk in another way about being beyond distinctions. So they're talking for a while, and Shariputra asks, sort of out of the blue, Goddess, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? I am sorry to even talk about this, but this is based on this old belief, which is wrong. Let me be clear about that. That women could not become liberated without first transforming into a male body. It just expresses the extreme sexism of the time. And to answer him, the goddess goes back to the idea that individual people are not really real. She says, Reverend Shariputra, if a magician were to incarnate a woman by magic, would you ask her what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? And Shariputra says, no, such a woman would not really exist. So what would there be to transform? The goddess says, just so, Reverend Shariputra, all things do not really exist. So if people don't really exist, gender doesn't really exist, how could gender have something to do with the awakening? And thereupon, the goddess does a really cool thing. Thereupon, the goddess employed her magical power to cause the elder Shariputra to appear in her form and to cause herself to appear in his form. Then the goddess, transformed into Shariputra, said to Shariputra, transformed into the goddess, Reverend Shariputra, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? And Shariputra, transformed into the goddess, replied, I no longer appear in the form of a male. He's not really answering the question. He's just freaked out. My body has changed into the body of a woman. I do not know what to transform. So then the goddess talks to him about how women are not women, so they can't transform into men and vice versa. Then she quotes the Buddha saying, in all things there is neither male nor female. Then she changes Shariputra back into his male form. And you wonder if he's still freaked out, if he's like totally relieved, or if he values that experience, like, wow, I got to know, for 5 minutes what it's like to be a woman. And I think, the world would be a better place if everybody could do this. So anyway, they go into this final dialogue where she says, perfect enlightenment stands upon the impossible. because it is impossible, no one attains the perfect enlightenment of Buddhahood. Shariputra says, but the Buddha has declared that the Buddhas have attained perfect Buddhahood. And she asks him, Elder, have you attained sainthood? And he says, it is attained because there is no attainment. And she says, just so. There is perfect enlightenment because there is no attainment of perfect enlightenment. So Shariputra finally gets it, finally. Because there is no attainment, things are attained. It doesn't make sense, but it makes sense. And I could take this further and say that because there is no real moon, but only a reflection in the water, there really is a moon. Because there is no Ted, there is Ted. We can't express this logically, but we can see it in practice. It's precisely because there are no real individual forms and everything is related. And because we can see that unreality, that we can also see the beauty and the vividness of the individual forms. We can see their reality. So we can look out here at the frozen lake on this very cold and icy day, and we see this thing that conventionally we call a lake. I know it's not a lake at all. This idea of a lake is a construction of our minds. It's not separate from everything else. And yet I know that whatever it is really beautiful and it's really vivid. It's as beautiful as a bubble or a flash of lightning or a tortoise-hair coat. So I would like to leave you with this koan. What could be more real than a tortoise-hair coat? And thank you for your kind attention. Whew. That was fun. So we have time for a comment. If anyone would like to say something.
Ted?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Can you explain a little bit more, when anytime killing comes up in a, where, you're killing the enemy, it just immediately my antennas go up and it's like, well, but what about our precepts? I vow not to kill, but to nurture life. So how, is there a time period that they're saying that there weren't precepts, or, you know what I mean?
A time period when there weren't.
When you were saying the word arhat and its definition.
Yeah, killing of
animal,
passions.
right?
Yeah.
So why would they have that definition and then have the precepts?
That's pretty. Yeah.
Get it?
Yeah, I do. That's pretty interesting. And I think they had those things simultaneously. They had this idea of, you do not kill. That's a definite precept. And yet they talk about killing passions. And I think that kind of shows kind of a contradiction in that early thinking, because they're approaching this idea sometimes with this very clear division of killing and not killing, and other times not. And I think it kind of points out that any kind of duality is going to be difficult. And if you attach too much to the duality, you're just going to have problems. Because if we look at killing, what should I do about that precept? For some people, that means one thing. For others, it means something else. For some people, it means being a strict vegetarian. For other people, no. And for some folks, the idea is to sort of do some killing in relation to the not killing precept, because they want to totally avoid killing in any way whatsoever. But no one can really do that. Even if you're a vegetarian, the food you're eating, the grain you're eating, creatures were killed in the field when the combine came through, you know. We cannot be separate from the web of life. No one can attain total freedom from killing. So we have to kind of find our place on that continuum, and we have to each decide what is the correct thing for me regarding that precept. So that was a bit of a wandering answer, but I kind of got there. All right. Good. Oh, I see two hands up. Ginny.
Good morning, Ted. Thank you for your talk. I appreciated especially the section there with the goddess and Shariputra and what that's kind of doing about the duality of gender. I feel like that sounded familiar to me. I wonder if, I think we may have looked at that passage during one of the LGBTQIA group meetings, which plug for that if anybody in the room hasn't been there, might be interested in that. What I value about it, having heard it this morning, that I think maybe didn't occur to me as much the first time I encountered it, was this. It's interesting that it's situated, as you say, in a broader context, historical context, and you know the broader kind of text of this kind of deeply sexist idea. But here we have this passage that is really questioning or pointing to like kind of the social construction or the idea that we have about gender, and that it really is maybe just one way of looking at people and people's experiences, and that maybe we might have a different idea, or we could have a different way of looking at gender and gender expression. And it also kind of brought up for me some gratitude around that I get to be in a time and place where I experience folks who have been, questioning and showing different ways to experience gender that I have been exposed to, that have helped to kind of raise my consciousness around that being a construction, and kind of the ideas that I have inherited around that. Kind of in the same way that, as you say, we look at the moon and maybe see a crescent, but there's some other way to look at it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ginny. I'm grateful for that too, being very aware of how sort of straight-jacketing traditional gender roles can be, and how much they've changed in my lifetime. I am grateful for that. So, yeah. And just kind of a footnote here, there's a similar thing that happens in the Lotus Sutra, and this spring in practice period, we'll be looking at that as well. There's another involving the dragon girl, as she's called. So I think Adam.
Yeah, hi Ted, thank you for your talk. I was hoping to ask a question that I think is not new. I think this question has come up before, but I'm just interested in it today, which is, I guess so I can understand if you kind of tune in with this sense that other people as people might not be as real as we normally take them, and that we can still have compassion for them. And in fact, that compassion can be more universal than what we're used to. I guess I'm wondering right now about if acknowledging that unreality, if there's some danger that you can be sort of dismissive of suffering, even if you have compassion for others in that moment. Can you sort of take other people's suffering to be not real? Or is there, is there something to be sort of careful about there, or am I maybe not seeing it quite right?
No, that's a very, very helpful way of seeing it, I think. If we think of people as not real, there are all kinds of pitfalls there. We could be less compassionate toward them. We could have this sort of generalized view that's just not very warm or very human and doesn't involve the heart. But, you know, people are both not real and real. And they are very real. And we're always going to go back to that realness too, and always go back to sort of this personal, that attached kind of love. It's always going to be mixed in. And that's a good thing, because that really awakens our heart. And, you know, true awakeness incorporates that in. That sort of attached love is part of the whole deal. So yeah, we don't want to get off into sort of this abstract, generalized love and not feel our, you know, conventional, big-hearted, attached, wonderful feelings for each other. So thank you for that comment. So this is probably, okay, one more comment, Bonnie.
Yes, just in the way you explained that, I'm wondering if real is like another way of saying separate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, separate is kind of better. Real is kind of shorthand. A shorthand, yeah. It's not really about whether things exist or not. It's whether or not they exist independently, whether they exist separately from other things. So, yeah, thank you. All right, well, thank you once again. It's been great speaking this morning. Thanks for your kind attention. And turn this over to Joe, our esteemed Doan.